Good morning, everyone. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Joseph Lennon, Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Villanova, to offer a word of welcome.
Thank you, Jerry. Welcome, honored guests and speakers, to this Villanova University-sponsored virtual conference on sustainable peace building after genocide. Villanova, as you probably know, has long been committed to religious studies and to peace and justice education. My own area, my own realm of Irish studies has wrestled for a long time with ways to move beyond conflict while understanding the seeds of strife. We're very fortunate today to have so many of you, so many leaders, diplomats, and distinguished academics join this conference today and tomorrow. Dr. Jerry Beyer and his team, Jean and all, have done fine work in assembling you together to explore sustainable peace building. The world continues to witness and learn from what has emerged from the crises in Rwanda and Bosnia and Herzegovina, human catastrophes that deserve peaceful ways forward and offer new understandings on violence and mass conflict. Sharing considered ideas and arguments on religion, justice, and gender will aid diplomacy and community building beyond this week. Just as you come together as a group today, you also remain within your own varied communities. May you influence one another with your insights and fellowship, yielding new fruit for a world with far too much war. Please forgive my inability to take part in all, but I look forward to the recording, as do many others. But thank you all for being here today and for sharing your experience and your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Lennon. So again, welcome to everyone who has joined us, and especially to our distinguished panelists and speakers to this conference, Building Sustainable Peace After Genocide, Lessons from Rwanda and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm grateful that all of you can be with us today. I'd like to, if I may, first ask that we start with a moment of silent prayer or quiet reflection in remembrance of the victims of the genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia, and for all those who have labored to build sustainable peace in their aftermath. On April 7th, 1994, the genocide in Rwanda commenced. According to the United Nations, over 1 million people died and hundreds of thousands of women were raped. During the same time, a horrific war was raging in Bosnia, during which an ethnic cleansing campaign uprooted millions of people, tens of thousands sent to concentration camps, and genocide was committed against Bosnian Muslims. In both cases, the world looked on, largely ignoring the pleas of Rwandans and Bosnians and the all too familiar cry, "Never again." We gather to mark the 30th anniversary of these tragic events and to hear the voices of those who have undertaken the incredible task of building sustainable peace after genocide. I'm extremely grateful to each of our esteemed speakers who will share their perspectives on the methods, key actors, successes, and ongoing obstacles in the peace-building process since the tragedies in Rwanda and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also want to thank our sponsors who've made this conference possible, the Lilly Fellows Program and the Villanova University College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I also want to give thanks to Jeannie Lochner, who has done a tremendous job organizing this conference. Jeannie is our administrative assistant in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies and conference organizer extraordinaire. So thanks, Jeannie. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists for our first session on peace building in Rwanda after the genocide. Each panelist will speak for roughly 20 minutes, which will leave ample time for questions from the audience. Once all three panelists have finished, you may use the Zoom raise hand function if you wish to present your question verbally. We ask that you turn on your microphone and camera, if possible, to present your question. Jeannie Lochner will acknowledge questions in the order that they are presented. Alternatively, you may type questions in the Q&A box if you prefer, and I will do my best to present your questions in the order in which they appear. In both cases, please keep your questions brief and let us know to whom you are directing your questions. And now we turn to our esteemed panelists. First, our first speaker is Marcel Uwineza, S.J., Ph.D. He is a Jesuit priest from Rwanda. He holds a Ph.D. in systematic theology from Boston College. He holds an MBA in leadership and management from York St. John University in the United Kingdom. He is currently the principal of Hekima University College in Nairobi, Kenya. He served as Dean of the Jesuit School of Theology at the same institution. He also served as the formation assistant of the Jesuits of Rwanda-Burundi region. Uwineza is also on the board of Theological Studies, the esteemed journal. His research and teaching interests include Christian anthropology, ecclesiology, genocide studies, religion, and ethics. His publications are numerous. Among them are Risen from the Ashes, Theology as Autobiography, and the book Reinventing Theology in Post-Genocide Rwanda, Challenges and Hopes, which he co-edited with our other speaker, Father Elisee Rutagambwa. His forthcoming book is Healing a Wounded People, A Theology for a Divided World. Marcel Uwineza has also given myriad addresses, among them a talk at the United Nations General Assembly in 2019 called 25 Years After the Genocide in Rwanda, A Testimony. Next, we will have Dr. Eric Ndushabandi. Eric is a professor of political science and international relations at University of Rwanda and associate researcher at UCLouvain in Belgium. He's an international consultant for different organizations, including the UN and other international cooperation agencies. He is a practitioner and recently the director of an independent think tank and peacebuilding organization, the Institute and Research of Dialogue for Peace. Specializing in community-driven models in peacebuilding, counterterrorism, racism, and other forms of extremism, he is the chair and founder of the Center for Research and Training on Human Rights and Democracy for Peace. He focuses on post-conflict reconstruction processes in Africa, with emphasis on transitional justice, including memory and identity politics, governance and community-driven peace, and governance and community peacebuilding mechanisms. At UCLouvain, he's involved in the development of equality, diversity, and inclusion policies. At the Kennedy School of Governance at Harvard University, he's involved in assessing global practices of racial healing from inception to implementation and establishing guidelines with the aim to create generalizable knowledge about truth-telling, healing, and accountability processes that have been effective. And our final speaker for this panelist will be the Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega. Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega is a single mother and grandmother who has been a member of the National Parliament of Rwanda for the last 16 years. Since 2008, she has served on the Chamber of Deputies. Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega has also worked for more than 10 years on the Political Affairs and Gender Committee of the Parliament and 3 years on the Foreign Affairs and Security and Cooperation Committee. Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega earned a master's degree in Sociology of Comparative Development at the University of Natal, South Africa, and a bachelor's degree in Social Sciences from the National University of Rwanda. She has 21 years of academic experience as an associated professor at the National University of Rwanda, College of Arts and Social Sciences. During this period, from June 1999 to 2000, she was a team leader involved in establishing the social and qualitative approaches applied to HIV prevention, planning, citizenship, and transformative leadership. Her research interests range from behavioral change related to HIV/AIDS prevention, gender empowerment, to Rwanda's socioeconomic reconstruction after the 1994 genocide. Honorable Euthalie has done decades of work in her community. Among other activities, she's a co-founder and former president of the Genocide Survivors Association in the Nyanza District, South Province, which focuses on the self-reliance and development of undereducated youth and widows coaching in rural areas. She is also an activist and proponent of nonviolence and peacebuilding, providing training, mentoring, and coaching for local leaders in Rwanda. I think you all agree that our panelists, we are delighted and honored to have such esteemed panelists with us today. So welcome, and we look forward to learning from you and with you today. I invite our first panelist, Marcel.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for your kind words. And thank you very much for this invitation. It's an honor and it's a responsibility. And thank you for honoring our people in Rwanda, particularly at this juncture when we commemorate 30 years after the genocide against the Tutsi. We are honored, and please thank the president of the university and everyone involved in the planning of this webinar. And without further ado, I will now go to my presentation, which I entitled Women Peace Builders in Rwanda Since the Genocide Against the Tutsi. So it is focused on the role, the place, and the role of women in building a nation in Rwanda. That is where I will focus. I hope everyone can see my slides. So that's where we are. Maybe just to begin, here is a short introduction. So this is what to expect in this brief presentation in the short time allocated to me. Really a brief background to the genocide, and then the role of Rwandan women in rebuilding the nation, so in peace building. What lessons can we learn from Rwanda? Some proposals, and then a conclusion. That's what we expect in my short presentation. It is narrowed on the role of women. Since I'm the one starting, it's probably good to just locate, to give people some idea of where we are. This is a map of Rwanda. It's a short country. For those in the United States, it will be almost the size of Maryland state. So just to give an idea, it is located in East Central Africa in what is commonly known as the Great Lake region. On the northern part of Rwanda, you have Uganda. Then in the south, you have Burundi. In the western part, you have Congo. In the eastern part, you have Tanzania. So that gives you an idea of where we are talking about. And I know our esteemed viewers know this, but it helps. Maybe just to begin, what image would one use or choose to depict the present situation in Rwanda? In an article by an esteemed colleague, Father Martin Nizigiyimana, he was asked this question, and the answer he gave: to depict Rwanda, you will give the image of a cemetery and a construction site. You have this in a book that we wrote. A cemetery, why? Because almost on every hill of Rwanda, you have dry bones. You have many people who have been killed, and we are still rediscovering people who have been killed. And we have many genocide memorials. So people who have been defaced or made invisible, if you like. So that is the symmetry, and almost on every hill of Rwanda. And of course, that has left unimaginable wounds to survivors. But at the same time, you also have a construction site. You have a country that is rebuilding itself. I give this image of, on one side, what you have here, you have a church that is called Nyamata, is a memorial site. More than 20,000 people are killed inside the church. And now on the other side, you have another church that is being rebuilt, has been rebuilt after the genocide. This is the section of the city of Kigali that has the capital city of Rwanda that has come up. So a country that comes from a graveyard to becoming a new life has emerged again. Maybe just a brief history. Long-standing divisions with seeds in the abuse of power, negative ethnicity, greed for resources, dehumanization of the perceived enemy. And here it's good to be specific because we don't want to have ambiguity on this. The people who are targeted were the Tutsis, and those others who were killed because they were shielding Tutsis. And then, of course, fear, hatred, lies, and complacency, and all kinds of feelings have contributed remotely to the genocide. But the target should be known. It's a genocide against the Tutsis. There is no ambiguity on this. In 1994, Rwanda lost between 800 to 1 million, mostly Tutsi and moderate Hutus, who refused to support a genocidal regime, and more than 2 million people became refugees in the neighboring countries. So you can imagine what that means. Abandoned by the international community and by neighbors as well. The killings took place in religious and public spaces, such as churches, schools, and administrative buildings. One of the scholars has called this an intimate genocide. In one of his books that he wrote, this is Philip Gurevich, he wrote a book, "We wish to inform you that we will be killed tomorrow with our neighbors." He says this was an intimate genocide because it was done by the people we knew, not by outsiders. This is a church. So many people were killed there. So exactly what I meant, a genocide, a description of the social and psychological proximity among perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. This is a good book. I would recommend people to buy it. We wish to inform you that tomorrow will be killed. It's beautifully written and gives you an idea of where we have come from. There are also a few other books that we wrote. One I co-authored with Dr. Elisee and another Jesuit, Michel Kamanzi, and another book that really touches the heart of how I survived the genocide, Risen from the Ashes, for more details, since the time will not allow. Now, what impact has this had on women? So to narrow it down, Rwanda's history is replete with unimaginable wounds and bitter memories, and this cuts across all Rwanda's fabrics. Rwanda was completely broken, and every Rwandan was affected. Many of the dead, particularly women, were sexually assaulted. This is in a book by Brown. Human Rights Watch has observed that testimonies from survivors confirm that rape was extremely widespread, and that thousands of women were individually raped, gang raped, raped with objects such as sharpened sticks or gun barrels, held in sexual slavery, or sexually mutilated. And in another documentary, Human Rights Watch reported that loved ones of victims were often made to watch or participate in the killing of their own relatives. Gang rape was common, as well as forced incest. Elderly, vulnerable women and girls were not spared. So the genocide 1994 wounded Rwanda, and in a more strongly women. The impact of women is that since rape carries stigma and many women do not reveal the truth of what happened to them for different reasons, the rape victims' inability to ever find a husband, there is a fear, if I reveal what happened to me, I will never find a husband. Or I will be rejected by the family relatives. And then fear of reprisals because of those who raped them were still living in the neighborhood. Or the survivor's guilt. Why did this happen to me? The fear of being asked to testify in public. So these are reasons, the impacts that the genocide had on women in Rwanda. And of course, you can imagine impact on the children that were born out of rape. The genocide challenged the fabric of Rwandan society. And prior to 1994, mind you, the genocide happened in 1994, from April to July 1994. Prior to 94, men were the undisputed heads of the family, while women played a complementary role in ensuring family survival. After the genocide, there have been a complete shift, a paradigm shift, if I should use the family was fractured. There were more widows and orphans, and many women assumed the role of the head of the family, responsible for the continued care of their own children or other remaining family relatives. So women became family heads. Now, when it comes to peace building, one of the definitions is that really is a development of a constructive of personal, group, political relationships across ethnic, religious, class, national, and racial boundaries. So women have contributed to Rwanda in so many of these, either at a group level, at a political level, at the ethnic level, at the religious level, at the national level, and we will see that shortly. Since the genocide, the status of women has improved. One could say it's a blessing in disguise. Alongside their male counterparts, women chose to look beyond the horizon of tragedy. Women's participation in associations, in credit groups, in farm cooperatives has grown greatly. And these assemblies provided the replacement of the lost support networks and family ties the war had severed. This is in a book by Morogere. There is a wonderful book by an American, Swanee Hunt, The Rwandan Women Rising, and she wrote this, and I quote, "Today, more than 60% of the seats in Rwanda's elected House of Parliament are held by women, the highest in the world. And this is not a matter of statistics, a number of unrivaled by any other nations," says Hunt. "Women have risen to positions that allow them to address their common challenges. Reconciliation of divided groups, this will come soon as I present, housing, education, especially education for girls, healthcare, rape and mental and reproductive health, women's land inheritance, equality in marriage, poverty in order to support the common good." So Hunt, this is another good book if you want to know how women have contributed to rebuilding peace and Rwanda after '94. Now, it's important to realize that the ideas about gender or women rising did not come from outside. They came from within. So it's not that Rwanda borrowed from elsewhere. The leadership of Rwanda has been aware of the importance of identifying women as true actors in the transformation of our country. And this is a quotation from Aloysia Nyumba, the first gender woman minister in Rwanda in 2009. She wrote this: "Women in parliament have promoted laws that protect women against gender-based violence." We have Honorable on our panel. I'm sure she will say even more. After the genocide, women joined support groups and organizations such as ProFarm, an advocacy organization for women. Abasa, this is an association of women who were the sole survivors of the genocide. Uwineza, all these are groups that helped them really to create a new landscape, to come together, to build peace, so that they could breathe new air through their work and sharing of experiences. Others forged a new future for their children. According to Pearson and Paul in their book, Demonstrating Legislative Leadership, women have improved dialogue between the grassroots and national levels, enhancing collaboration between civil society and the government, and demonstrated legislative leadership and advocacy for human rights. Now, I don't think it would be far-fetched to say this is part of peace building. Women became political activists because of historical patterns of injustice. And this is why it is good to go back to history. Since 1962, when Rwanda got independence, many Rwandan women were refugees in Zaire, the current Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Tanzania, and Uganda. Many had little or no education in the host countries. They had no land. They were told that by the then Rwandan regime that Rwanda was a full cup, and those who had fled should make their permanent homes elsewhere. But they had remained stateless. This is again in a book by J. Carney, who has written an excellent book, an Oxford book on Rwanda before the genocide. I will recommend the book. Now, women just realized they had no choice. They had to join the struggle in the building of the nation. And I quote, "You are thrown into the struggle by the fact that you are forced to leave your country by your own circumstances. So the feeling of that injustice, of growing up as a refugee, seeing the conditions of your parents who are in as refugees, then most definitely when the liberation movement for Rwanda in 1990 started, it was automatic. We had to join for peace building. So really, the peace building in Rwanda by women was forged out of necessity. Their prospect of the remaining refugees or coming back was distant. The struggle for survival increased. The host countries permitted refugees less and less room for political organization. So women had to be involved in the struggle for self-determination to reclaim their dignity. So in all this then, as I proceed, what is then the role of women in the rebuilding of Rwanda after 1994? Some women joined in the struggle as a matter of survival. Their courage supported their conviction to fight for their rights. Some chose to seek leadership positions to build a more just and inclusive society. Women in key positions to deal with the challenges of reconciliation in the aftermath of the genocide. So many Rwandans were in prison, especially those who had participated in the killings. So many women worked in the Unity and Reconciliation Commission and in the Gacaca transitional jurisdictions. These were the traditional courts engineered or re-engineered to deal with so many perpetrators of the genocide, suspected perpetrators of the genocide. Women made up more than 30% of some 160,000 Gacaca judges countrywide, and were among those considered as good and honest witnesses. This is from a book written by a British writer, Randall. Women have played a major role as community mediators in Kinyarwanda Abunzi. They contributed to the resolution of conflicts, employing traditional Rwandan practices of conflict resolution. Rwanda's tragedy taught us to lose all fear. After all we have been through, you realize that nothing could be worse, hence the call for action. Women in peacekeeping, we now have even women in peacekeeping missions of the United Nations across Africa. So together with their male counterparts, women have helped to reduce the number of people who are languishing in poorly serviced prisons without those prisoners having to go to the magistrate courts. That's another contribution to peace building. Women have helped with the healing of memories and truth tellers. I got to know where my relatives, my siblings, were thrown during the genocide because of some women who spoke the truth. So this reconciliation process has strengthened their position in society and helped them to break the glass ceiling in many areas formerly occupied only by men. Now, if we were to go into the legal system, women have contributed a lot. Laws enacted to promote the rights of women have encouraged their advancement. So women parliamentarians have influenced the reform of old laws. These include the land law, the family law, the law on inheritance and succession, gender-based violence law, electoral law, law on trade and organic budget. So really, and I'm sure Nyirabega, Honorable, could even say more, since she's one of those. Women leaders in the parliamentary forum have lobbied their male counterparts and influenced key decisions that led to the referendum in 2003, the Constitution. So as I come towards the end, women have been instrumental in passing women's interest legislation, such as inheritance law. This law gives women the right to inherit property, which was not there before. And you can imagine in a country where so many young women had remained, or young girls, now this law has allowed the orphaned girls to inherit the property of their parents. It has benefited widows and girls, orphans whose land was confiscated by their male relatives after the genocide. Nevertheless, this inheritance law faces challenges because some rural and poor women are often excluded from its benefits because their marriages were not formally registered due to the cost involved. And as much as they have no way to prove their co-ownership of land and property with their husband. So there is still a room to improve. Consequently, the idea of the law does not always translate into women's lived realities. Again, women in associations have worked together to vote. And these associations have raised awareness for rural women. So I'm not only talking of women in the city. Now, what is the challenge as I come towards the end? There is a need to provide education to teach rural women to vote independently and intelligently. Although the gender quotas have raised women's participation in decision-making roles, women must use this tool to mobilize themselves into a critical mass that is capable of sustaining the momentum and capable of permeating societies well beyond the use of tools of affirmative action. So there is still a room for improvement. What are the lessons from Rwanda? And I will borrow some of these lessons from the current president of Rwanda. Given what we have lived through, and I have not given the history of I only gave really a very brief history because I'm looking at women after 1994. We just have come to realize we cannot ask others to value our lives more than we highly value, more highly than we ourselves do. No one is ever going to value you if you don't value yourself. Hence the duty to preserve the memory and to tell our history. Never wait for rescue or ask permission to do what is right to protect the people. And women have done this. We need to stand firm against the politics of ethnicism and populism that divides people. The politics that is organized on the basis of populism is not helpful. It has cost Rwanda. If there is another lesson we learn from Rwanda, is that the culture of impunity needs to be fought always. Because if there is one area that led to the genocide, that people committed crimes and they were never pursued. And now after the genocide, women, especially women in the legal profession, have really put men to task. Some perspectives as we look to the future. One lesson we need to learn from Rwanda and as we look is really to continue engaging with history. Messy as it has been, it is our own history. We need to continue forming and listening to the stories of women. They need to consult the victims of history. They are the authority. Like Albert Camus says, we must take the victim's side. Certainly, solidaristic memory based on truth and mercy. It's not enough just to have the truth. It's not enough to have justice. There has to also be mercy that restores even the perpetrator. There is a need of a prophetic church beyond a superficial Christianity. In a country that had more than 80% of Christians, it is hard to understand how we ended up with a genocide. Obviously, I have not developed this aspect, but I think this is we have to be critical of the church as well. As I conclude, Rwanda offers hope. There is hope. And there is a beautiful quotation I gather from the movie, The Shawshank Redemption. One major character is called Andy Dufresne, and he tells Red. Maybe some of you, in the audience have watched this movie. These two guys have been in prison for a long time, and they are almost losing hope. But towards the end, when they get out of prison, Andy tells Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. Rwanda has gone through hell, but there have also been wonderful, good people, and women have played such a magnificent role, really to underscore that there is still hope. And remember the words of Jeremiah, telling the people of Israel, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. So as we speak about Rwanda, let us not narrow it to one page of 1994 or before 1994. We've been writing other pages. Rwanda is not reducible to the genocide. Obviously, forgiveness is another project that will continue to set us free. And this I can say more. I have encountered those who killed my siblings. We underwent a journey and I forgave them, and that has set me free. That's another. And to conclude, maybe with an image. Rwanda has side mirrors like that of a car, and that is 1994 and its horrific past, and so many people who died during the genocide against the Tutsi. But we also have a windshield like that of a car with a hope of a destination for things better to come. May you continue to tell the story of Rwanda and to tell it correctly. I thank you for your privileged attention.
Thank you so much, Father Dr. Marcel, for that wonderfully enlightening presentation. I would like to, if I may, invite Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega to speak now, since you spoke so eloquently about the powerful role of women, and we are blessed and privileged to have one of those women in our midst today. So would you be so kind as to speak with us now, Honorable Euthalie, and I will share your PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jerry. Thank you. I'm glad to be with you now. Good afternoon. Okay. So, big pardon to Father Marcel, because my presentation is, I didn't know that you are presenting on women, role of women, but maybe we'll have the same, not the same story because of, yes, two parts of the same middle of the same story, all right? So is a story of Rwandan rise. So maybe there is some slide I will not really talk on it because you have done it, but next, if you can continue very quickly, and then maybe, okay, I have like introduction saying how the country was devastated and the step of women. So the first one was just a new constitution in 2003. It's not the one, but I can mention some. I will talk about the key enablers for transformation in Rwanda, and then focus on women in parliament. So just highlighting the key achievement and the tangible outcome. I will also give some lesson to be learned and challenging. Next. In traditional Rwandan society, we should know that is a particular society, but gives respect for women as the guardian of Rwandan society, which is a positive values. But give the remit participation of women in public affairs. And then we should mention the colonial regime that started in the 90s, even the missionaries, because they reinforced the traditional division of labor in Rwanda, but also they started the division and discrimination And then we will have the discrimination laws and practice in the First Republic and the Second, which will end at the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. So we know that even Father Marcel talked about it, affected how is the genocide affected the entire social fabric, with real deep consequences, especially for women and girls, as the sexual violence and rape was the weapon of genocide for the demonization of victims. And then what do we have after the genocide? Yes, Rwandan think about unconventional means for relief and recovery and rebuilding. So the invention was about unity, inclusion, and the transformational agenda in every corner of building the country. Next. If we talk about a devastated country, let's say that the Rwanda was really in ashes country. Hundreds of thousands bodies were killed on the roadside. Churches, schools were destroyed. Office and business looted. Electricity was erratic. Running water not existent. Even governments was really a failed government. It was a failed country. Above all, the nation was traumatized by crimes and yes, the population was really decimated because 1,080,000 were killed within 100 days. When you talk about that, it means if it's 1,080,000 people were killed, it means every day 1,000, yes. And then every hour we have around 400, more than 400. And every minute, 7 people were killed, which means we have 7 people every minute for every hours and every day within 100 days, which means the traumatic situation were higher after the genocide. Can we continue? What the women, after that, you know that many male were perpetrators and fled to neighboring nation, and others were killed. So which means that 70% of Rwandan post-genocide population was female. And those women ensuring that their families should be step up in a survival situation. Mothers took orphans children, organized a support group for widows. Women moved from planning, building to reconstructing them. They started the business through the country. They created stability and aftermath of unspeakable violence. Next. Now, can we talk about the Rwandan parliamentarian? Because the first of all, it was to create a forum that they can speak, because it was that time of 1990, after 2 years after 1994, 1996, 12 women started an association or a forum. And what was the the vision was just to be united, peaceful, and prosperous, gender-responsive society, where all citizens enjoy equal rights and opportunity, and where women are empowered. The mission was to contribute to building an egalitarian, equitable, inclusive, and participatory society by playing an influential role in matters related to gender in the consideration of the mission of Parliament. The first step was to put in place, can we continue, please? To put in place, okay, again. Next, okay. Yes, to put in place a legal framework, and the first one is the Constitution. So we know that because before of the Constitution, it was a national dialogue, and the women participate in the national dialogue. They have seats in the commission tasked to drafting a new constitution, but also by yes, receiving or the whole people who wanted to talk about how to build the country, how to move from the ashes to try to be together. So the constitution were approved by referendum in 2003. And by that time, the one step was just to encourage women, which is they can be in both formal and formal leadership. And that commission established 30% of the quota for women through government and all decision making. And by that time, they put in place one organ called Gender Monitoring Office, which means if there is any law, an institution, anyone which is not, stand for equality and equity, this should be answerable to the population, the whole Rwandan. So, and how they did next, there are some key enablers for rapid and transformation, fast transformation. One is the political will. Consistently, our leadership, we have the same ideology of how can we be, how can we relate, how can we collaborate in united country. And after that, how women and men can work together, which is the alliance between men and women, champion leadership, but also at the grassroots level. Third is the gender responsive policies, registration and program everywhere and in every corner of our governance. And the last one is the strong national gender machineries and strategic partnership. So civil society, private sector, government, parliament, or institution are just working together for the strategic partnership on how to be together, how can we look the same way, in the same direction, with a vision. Next. Can we talk about the key achievement? One is Gachacha quotes. So he say, Father Marcel talk about it. So maybe I will not really go in details, but what I can say that it's a kind of truth reconciliation process, which operate most often at the community level, where the perpetrators and relatives and other families of victims can sit together and just talk and I mean, and have a justice. It's a kind of a social justice. So you will have also the justice as the ordinary justice, because we have like more than 2 million of people who are being participating in a genocide. So next. So I have some examples of legal and policy strategies and the program for promoting gender equality. So because as in Article 10 of the Constitution, it mentioned the fundamental principles of to guide us, and one of them is a gender equality. But more on that, we have power sharing, there is zero unity, there is so many things, even yes, even to be against the genocide ideology. So here there are some reviews, key legal framework and reviewing them and the programs. So maybe I will not really talk about it on those, but what I can say is the women in parliament really work so hardly, but the key element here is to have the collaboration with men. So in Rwanda, we do not have feminist view, but more equality and equity in all we can do. Can be women, men, but also young people, vulnerability people, vulnerable people, sorry, and even elders. So all people, we are contributing to the construction of our country. Next. So another thing is, as we have 70% of, 53% of the country are women. So one was just one factor was to enable many people is to build the capacity of women, including many programs in mentorship, in coaching. Yeah. And why? Because we know that when you teach or educate one woman is to educate maybe more than one person. Is the whole family, and the whole family is the foundation of the country. So the women in parliament provided their contribution in a synergy with national and sub-national actors through building strategic partnership, active participation in community dialogues, to mobilize the people on women's rights and their contribution to development. There are so many consultative meetings and inter-dialogue with key stakeholders to get evidence for influencing policies and the program. So there is engagement of young people, girls and boys in the school and in the community, to contributing to nurturing a generation of gender-sensitive boys and girls, to develop the change in culture as inclusiveness side, and preparing leaders of the future, the tomorrows. Okay, next. So what do we have as the outcome of gender responsive policies in all those laws and the program in terms of uplifting women, children, and girls' well-being? So next, that is in the governance. When we have in the governance pillars, we have women participation in decision-making. you know that when you are not there, people maybe they would not talk about yes, I'm sorry, women participation in decision-making organs. We have now, by now, 45, more than 45% of ministers. We have in the Senate, we have 49.7% in judiciaries. We have in the district councils, governors, and lastly in parliament too. So those are the achievement of the presence of women in decision-making position at a different level, contributing to the choice to mainstreaming gender equality and decision-making process at all levels, and promoting accountability on gender equality across sectors. Next. So that is the trend. I will not go for it. The trend of representation of women in the lower chamber of parliament. The last term is 2018 to 2023. We now is 61%. Can we continue? It's just to show what we have saying Father Marcel and us in photos and pictures. So next. So that is the participation of women in peace building and the security organs. So Rwanda, you know that Rwanda is among the leading contributors of female police officers in peacekeeping mission. The number have been growing progressively over the last decade. The next photo is the participation of women at the grassroots level. What are those women are in community mediators organs, which is the key to access of justice at the district level, which is the decentralized level. So it's in charge of gender-based violence and child-related issues. Next. So in economic transformational pillars, we have the land ownership. As in Rwanda, the gender-sensitive land and the inheritance laws contribute to women access to economic resources, including lands. The statistic in 2022 showed that 62% of land is owned by couples, 14% by male, and 24% by women. So which was before 1994, it was not allowed of women, single women, to have a title of land in Rwanda. Next. So again, I was just showing the women participation and how the revolution in the ICT. Now we know that there is access of everything. It will be e-learning system, should be access to finance, it should be in bank, in business. So now women are for 84% in using all that items in by phone, by cell phone. Next. In social transformation, so we can say that Rwandan life expectancy increased from 46.4 in 78 to 69.9 in 2002, which is a big achievement. And the percentage of children in which for all basic vaccination now is 76% from in 2000. Now we have 96% in 2020. There is a decreasing in maternal death and decreasing also in infant mortality. So under 5 years, mortality decreased from 196 to 45 deaths per 1,000 live birth. Next. So I put some lessons to be learned from Rwanda if we wanted to achieve the peaceful country. One is a strong political will from the highest level and leadership. So which means we focus on the liberation of every policy and strategies by to have the equality in gender and the key factor to accelerate women representation as active participation in politics and decision making. Also, we choose to review policies and legal framework if they are not equally given for all people the benefit from any corner of the country resources. We choose also the alliance and partnership between men and women. So we now choose to be united more than divided country. Even the diversity is good, but when it's not for having together what you have to have, it's not an advancing collaboration. So we choose to be in a common agenda. And the third one, the fourth one is the consistency. In liberation ideology that we have, the women inclusion allows women to play the role of the struggle, but also to be in a partnership with sustainable development. The five, the strategic partnership, which means from the transition, we support to be in institutional, to develop the institutional capacities and to ensure the concept on gender equality with widely understood and mainstreaming at all levels. Next. Challenge. We have also some challenging situation. So there is a traditional mindset of men and women contributing to low participation of women in political process at all levels. And the second is the triple role of women, especially when we have the burden unpaid care work at domestic level, which is the huge barrier for fulfilling their careers and aspiration in every corner of political space. Third, the economic empowerment also, because more women are in agriculture of substance, informal business, and the small and medium entrepreneurship. So, and then the fourth, the consequences of COVID is not in Rwanda, but I think is at all level, at worldwide. Next. So we have the future to look at forward, to continue to advance and in sustain gender equality through focus on women economic empowerment, sustaining women participation in decision-making organ, to enhance accountability, and to emphasize on younger generation by mentoring, coaching, introducing in every curricula how to be equal in the same country. So my last slide is just to say, with regard to empowering women and promoting their socio-economic and political participation, we continue to make modest progress. We believe that beside improving gender relations in our country, this make healthy progress toward realizing our vision of to be united, democratic, and prosperous Rwanda. So the last slide is when you remember now for the 30-year anniversary of genocide commemoration, we said remember, unite, and renew, to say that together as Rwandan and Umunyarwanda, which means I'm Rwandan, you are, and I can live when I mean, I am Rwandan, I'm there because, or I'm surviving, or I'm living because you are also living, you are good, you are with me. So this is supporting, is not a slogan, but is how to listen from our heart that living together is the collaborating side of all Rwandan to be to achieve what we have to achieve in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. We don't hear you. Did you? You may unmute if you want.
She's muted.
Thank you so much, Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega, for that wonderful, remarkable presentation, which illustrated the signs of hope that Father Marcel spoke of. Let me now turn to our final panelist, Dr. Eric Ndushabandi, for his remarks. Please, Dr. Eric.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and you can see my slides. Good. I'm very grateful and I'm humbled really to sit on this important panel and this audience. Thank you for the invitation. I salute my brothers and the colleagues who connected me to this very prestigious university and giving me this opportunity. And I'm lucky that I will speak at this panel as the last one. Many things have been said, but my entry point will be maybe coming back on this question, but on memory and identity questions burden, how these have been managed. And from a very, very critical perspective, I will put on table some challenging point as sustainability for me is still a process and an ongoing process. My colleagues knows very well how I approach it. But let me go very quickly and good. I will take it from memory and identity question in post-conflict reconstruction processes. Then I will try to frame it. I know we are touching on this conflict without giving any framework of analysis. I tried to call it and to take it from identity-based conflict. And one of them, we can include ethnicity, we can include religious, and so on. How to start? One, the factors or characteristics of this identity-based conflict and how this impacted on this conflict in Rwanda before we go for sustainability of the peace. We have the burden of the colonization, which is very important to be noticed here, because this one polarized the origins of people, defending that Hutu and Tutsis are from outside, and the other two are local, and the autochthony and the nativism theories, which is based on Hamitic and the Bantu theories, which are very destructive until today. The successive regimes, which have been well qualified as a failed state before genocide, it is a successive and a chronic bad governance, bring people to poverty, yeah. Then the so-called democracy or multipartyism, which was initiated, it was mostly based not on a positive citizenship, but on ethnicity, which I'm qualifying here, not a democracy, but ethnocracy, which is far from democratic values. And in the city, we have something different from a citizen. The extreme poverty is a factor, very important to understand the sustainability later. And then the way we qualify things, the way we understand things, we definitely define or help us to understand the sustainability, peace, reconstruction journey. Everything goes with this us against them. So we are talking about sustainability when we are coming from a society. It was very dichotomized, anti-Tutsi rhetoric at the center. And we are coming from an ontological fear, and this is a genocide against Tutsi. The Hutus narrative, which think that the living together is not anymore possible before the extermination of Tutsis. So this is what I'm calling my survival will depend on the death of others or extermination of others. So this is a very radical conflict and radical process of dividing and exterminating one population. So it is based on this factor, very known, the book Emissaire or scapegoating theory, but also all is going with the narratives and the sustainability we come for correcting all narratives and how society is narrated. Collective victimization, nativism, or some autochthony theories, Bantu and Nilotic, and all this distracted and disconstructed the national identity consciousness, which left us with a very deep burden of traumatic memories. So here, identities are not just taken as element of categorization, but it goes with a very, very deep burden of traumatic memories. And memory and identity here are approached as the two faces of the same coin. So the conspiracy theory of Bantu against the Nilotic ideology, I will come back to this, negative solidarity and self-projection as Hutuism, which have been constructed and which is going on in the region when I'll be talking about the threat against this sustainability. Again, who can start to speak about peace building, and how, and from what, and what approaches? So I said, and I'm lucky to talk after my colleague and very honorable Euthalie, who's speaking from the government perspective and from very specific perspective for women, and this is very interesting. The government is the only one after 94 to take the lead. You can't bring pluralism in a post-genocide context. I say, you should voice everyone. You should democratize all memories. You should democratize all this narrative, which came immediately after 94, pressuring the regime in place or the political party leading one, the RPF, to very quickly bring back the former enemies and bring it to the democracy. When our streets are full of dead people and victims, everything destroyed, as it has been said. So all this is coming from the state theory. This is what is basing on in the 90s. After every conflict, the so-called international community, which have been absent during the genocide and in the whole process, is coming to impose and to make pressure to the political party, the RPF, to bring back former enemies and to reconstruct democracy and so on. So this institutionalization of post-conflict reconstruction and very quick agenda as if it is a cut and paste model of peace, which have been very difficult. So the transition of 9 years from 94 to 2013, when the first constitution was placed, you can say what was discussed inside, from where to start and how. So everything have been a priority here, but the first one was security. And you can't talk about sustainability when you don't have even security as a prerequisite for everything. Justice, healing, truth, forgiveness, reconciliation, all these are there on the table. We have different models, but which model could be applied to Rwandan context? So I saw in 98, to go very quickly, and even before, many mechanisms like civic education programs through Ingando and Itorero later, which are trying to make a choice of a transitional justice mechanism, unity and reconciliation, deliberately unity and reconciliation. Then we can see the very honorable said that there have been dialogue in 97, 98. You can say, who should take, who should sit on the table? Victims and genocidaires, who are sitting on the table for dialogue. So this was very problematic to take part of this table and going for these discussions. So a reparation was very, very, very urgent thing, and societal healing, but also in a very contextualized and very specific context of basic needs are not covered at all. We are in extreme poverty and vulnerability. So you start with rehumanization, as if you are rebuilding the trust and saying they're living together. There was no choice. Rwanda had no choice to choose, because the proximity between the survivors and all Rwandans around the Rwanda, it is an imperative for coexistence. So it's as if you have to recreate a new social contract founded on values. So this is very complex and very complicated transitional justice process. So the choices have been made. The most one is to base on a tradition and cultures. And when you choose this, you are in the perspective of nation building, to rebuild the peace through nation values and the traditions. And all policies have been selected from there. I'll come back to this very quickly. Then, what do we say about the churches, historians, academia? There is not any more trust to anyone in a post-conflict. So who will preside on this dialogue? Who will preside on this neutral and very critical reflection on the process to take? Who can develop safe and neutral spaces in a very silenced society? Who is ready to provide evidences and to understand and to have a common or very minimum understanding and interpretation around what happened in the society, as the history have been distorted from the colonial period to the two first regimes. So the government is the first one to initiate this, and you can see this orientation. It has been said here, the togetherness, it was an imperative, the unity, to destroy this dichotomization, to try to bring together, to fill the gap between victimization and collective guilty. Not all Hutus, not all Tutsis, not all victims, and so on and so on. All things becomes very sensitive. And as I'm talking, it is very sensitive. So reconciliation has been problematic. To reconcile who and who. You reconcile a victim of a genocide with a genocide or anything else. So the truth, it has been said here, what truth do we want? I said the truth with grande or truth with petit t's. If you open for all truths of everyone, you go in the side effect and you go in the different direction. And the forgiveness now and the collective guilty, how do you ensure that the forgiveness, and this is the very difficult page of this country, where forgiveness has been an imperative for this government to tell to the survivors to forgive, to bring the churches to announce forgiveness is a one of remedy to this problem. The threat, I will come back to denial. So to relax, but also to reflect, I propose this journey because I take this from behavior perspective and changing attitudes of people. The nation building, it means every context is unique. The national identity is very important. Memory and commemoration, justice is very important. Then everyone, every single life matters in the process. But how do we initiate a reconstruction process with all this process of different people? I call your attention to the very first picture. I made the choice deliberately to say, there is still a hope. How can we imagine a hope in a kind of society? And including history, education, and so on. The international community, the state building theories were not applicable anymore for this context. So having in and out, having all this population out of the borders as the government was establishing itself, having this justice, we can call it impossible justice, by the way, a crime which we can't forgive, a crime which we can't even punish. So every single life matters. Everyone should be in the process, but especially young people. I will start by this and I will end with this. But the pictures you are seeing is just representing one of the mechanisms initiated, which is a non-formal mechanism in Ngando, on which I worked very much for many years, as a space of transmitting an official narrative memory to try to bring interpretations around an acceptable narrative. And here, academia, historian, they can say, is it the truth? Is it the fact? Is it manipulated? Is it instrumentalized? Is it, and so on, all these critics. But here, the direction matters. The ideal matters. Here, the truth and the fact is around the unity and the reconciliation. All narratives had to be distorted because the truth is this. Here, the truth is defined by the official narrative in the sense of it brings people once again to live together to unity and reconciliation. So this is a mechanism where young people, and later one, this picture shows where we came from this very difficult time to now to imaginate, to project the society in the next generation of people who are sharing values. And this is the Euthalie, which is a values education, a foundation for dreaming for the next generation and the future. So this is repeated through many mechanisms. I will not come back to every single mechanism, but when you see all these pictures from all this dialogue at the national level, permanent and consistently repeating the same narrative at the national level up to the grassroots, all these people are talking about this and from informing and engaging the community in the process. The problematic justice, you said, it is an impossible justice. Look at our prisons in the first pictures. The second picture is the problematic justice, gachacha, which can't be a just punitive justice. It has to be a punitive. It gives a hope to survivors. It gives the truth. Now we know how we can bury our victims. We can have these people standing on the same place where they have been killing a few years ago. They are brought to the village. And this is very participatory, and it is very closer to people. So it is about symbolic reparation and difficult. The very last picture on the corner, this is our material today as academia, as researchers, to see how what came from all this process is well back at the Ministry of Unity and Reconciliation and the community engagement, where this data is just not just the truth, history of this genocide, but also a way of we overcome and we initiated an impossible and a very difficult justice. So from this journey, the former enemies are here now. They are coming from neighboring countries. where you see the bus, people at the border of Congo, brought in the center, and they get out at the last picture, engaged in the community for their own economic kit for integration in the communities. How communities are ready to receive this. We are at the 30th anniversary, and we are prepared now to receive more than 2,000 prisoners who are being sentenced by Gachacha, coming back in the community. The sustainable peace will come from all these processes, which is no. So we can see all this mechanism in Uganda collective every last Saturday of the month, where the president himself to the community are engaged. Once again, the same narrative is transmitted through this. What does it mean? I'm proposing you that this triangle, it is not a model or accepted model, but it makes me reflective. At the center, we have the national memory we are looking for to bring people to a common understanding, or approximately common understanding, but really to go forward. Then we have this narrative memory from the official, from the public, or from the government, transmitted to the population, and the population, we need a minimum adherence to this memory, which is not yet 100%, because these people are having memories coming from social media, from families, because we still have this nostalgic, and the ideology have been transmitted in families. Then we have these so-called scientific spaces and scientific books, because young people, researchers, are having an important impact on this peace sustainability. Then the community international, communauté internationale, the international community with the collaboration and the insight to the internal dynamics. So the national collective memory will come from all this process, and to ensure that the memories are reconciled and we go for sustainable peace. So at this juncture, for example, if I take just one component of national identity reconstruction, one side, we can see that as we repeat the Ubunyarwanda, Honorable talked about, being a Rwandan, recreating a society, the imagination of the idea of togetherness and being all Rwandans, it is not easy at all, but it was the only one choice to make life possible in the society. But we are at this junction of where we have still memory, nostalgia, trauma healing, history, political and social and economic claims, which are handling the process. But what this model is proposing for sustainable peace is, as we repeat, as we enhance this consciousness of being Rwandans, the ethnicity will decrease as we are addressing all these challenges in trauma, memory healing, socio-economic justice. This is the reflection here. So the question is now, what have been the role of non-state actors? The sustainability can't go only with the government perspective. This has been said already, but churches, faith-based organization, civil society organization have been engaging in different perspectives. And I'm coming from this world as I engage in community dialogue, I engage in peace education programs, which goes with individual therapy, societal healing, community-based approaches, community-driven initiative per categories. Here we have been talking about women, for example, a holistic perspective of governance and inclusive, because it's a matter of also every single individual to see himself as included in a governance system, because genocide happened in a vacuum of participation in a dictatorship system where people have never been challenging the processes. Community development project, open dialogue, and creating consensus. These have been very, very much said. Gachacha, I will not come back to this, but this is, it is evolving from Gachacha, which is a very decolonial approach, reconciliatory and community-based, telling story, collective guilty, collective, but it is closed now, Gachacha. But what the government is doing to sustain the gains of Gachacha is to engage in these reconciliatory committees, Abunzi. And Abunzi now is under revision again to ADR, and I'm lucky I participated in writing this policy, with my colleague did us, alternative dispute resolution mechanism. This is very community-led to sustain, once again, this participatory justice and reconciliation at the basis. So the inclusiveness have been said here. It's very key to sustain peace, inclusive governance, economy, meritocracy, and accountable, but also representativeness and competitive and pluralistic society. But the question here is, who can we trust? The monster of ideologies is still around. The monster of divisive ideas are still there. So the challenges are still around to make sure that we have this sustainable peace. And I said very pessimistically, generally I'm not, today than ever. Because why? Because in and out, as you engage in inside processes, we have this trauma, poverty, unhealed nation, unhealed people. Survivors are still claiming the truth of where people have been buried, and so on, so on. Diaspora are working very much in this world here around Rwandans. It is in and out still divided, and the internal dynamics are still coming outside with the Rwanda Day to try to bring all Rwandans together. You know, if this digital world, and Rwanda is very digitalized now, so people are grabbing all this ideology from social media. External pressures and conditionalities. All these ideologies is coming with the imposing democracy, as if democracy should go with development, it has to go with reconciliation of people and so on. So Great Lakes region, as I'm talking about threats, I like that Father Marcel presented the map. Look at this Great Lakes region, and I'm taking it from the ideology and the threat coming from the region against internal dynamics, where we are Rwanda is struggling to sustain what they have been doing, what we have been engaged in. So from all these rivers and lakes in the region, the ideology is not requesting any passport, any visa to cross the borders. It goes. How this started, to go very quickly at the end, the ideology of division, which is a real threat against internal dynamics. From the very first, the picture, once again, the burden of the colonial and the responsibility of the distortion of our history, which is still transmitted in social media and in some universities around. This is in Congo and here in Brussels, in Belgium. All these museums, the memories is still transmitting this ethnicity and divisive and Hamitic theories which are based on. So the failing aspects of international community to separate this second picture where military, militia, and refugees have been mixed in at the border of Rwanda, it is still coming and a threat against this ideology. Despite our effort to bring back all Rwandans in Rwanda, but we still have it. Then the risk is that this ideology of genocide is now becoming incorporated in institutions in the region. It is now institutionalized. It's becoming a political wing and militia wing to fight internal dynamics. This is now defended by people around Congo, around Burundi, and in the region, where FDLR and FOCA, who are still active, and these have been displayed to all Congolese in the communities in a context where Congo is still facing many challenges of governance and poverty. So the ideology here is not a number of people who cross the border. The FDLR here is the ideology which is adopted by and which is a threat against a sustainable peace in Rwanda. The ideology is now benefiting from this collaboration and enrichment in the Eastern Congo. The conclusion here is, how do we conclude about sustainability, building sustainable peace? It's very complex. Security, social, economic, political, but also human rights and democracies have been said. How do we ensure that sustainable peace is about reducing the risk of relapsing into conflict by strengthening national capacity? And when you have national capacity that is strengthened always at all levels, then it can lay the foundations for sustainable peace and development. So I say at the end, peace building or sustainable peace is a continuum of strategy processes. For Rwanda, it will go with a preventive mechanism against genocide ideology, peace building processes, continuous work from grassroots and for young people to enhance this trust and to open up some space for dialogue, really to make sure that people are expressing their wounds and they are healed as we progress for peace, which is owned by ordinary people, yeah, not by just elite. Designing and implementing peace education programs. These have been most of my work in the last decades. How peace education is infused in classes, how peace education is infused in non-formal mechanisms. So it goes beyond peace education program, it goes up to developing non-violent cultures. So when you go there, then you go to families and young children. Engaging in grassroots reconciliation and healing and fighting hate speech, as we are talking, it is going on in Eastern Congo and on social media. So allow me just to conclude by presenting you how I'm seeing as a sustainable peace with my humble work and contribution today as a chair and founder of the Center for Research and Human Rights and Democracy, my own center where we are trying to partner with different partners to go back in communities. We are putting at the center the children and saying this is a full circle learning between classes, teachers, parents, and the children should be a product of character, education, self-mastery. So he can't be engaged once again. So to sustain the peace, we'll go for this academic content, revisiting all this content, making sure that it's very participatory. We have been using art and musics. This is very important to engage innovative and creativity for young people and peacemaking skills. Then we can make sure that we have created not just good Rwandans, not just peaceful Rwandans, but really we have contributed to humankind and human community. So this is about the global humanity we are contributing to, and you can see it in classes. So my sustainability, I've been seeing it through these pictures, where these young people will be enhancing and practicing and being the influencers in a context where there is a separation between families and young people, transgenerational dialogue, intergenerational dialogue, and then making sure that our curriculum, our programs, because we are now at 90, 80, I think, I stand to be corrected. We stand at more than 95% of young people in school, because in Rwanda we have this education for all. Then it must include all this perspective. So for those who are already in secondary school, you can see young girls and young men meeting from secondary school, where once again, teachers are interacting and ourselves in this peace values education program. So those are my few insights about this. And I hope we can see sustainable peace from education programs. And my hope is just a holistic and all stakeholders engaged in this, including revisiting the religious role, civil society organization role, as well as the government opening spaces for this engagement. And the collaboration of international community and scientific community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ndushabandi, for this very informative presentation. We are short on time. I see just one question, and I wonder, it's to you, Dr. Eric, if you could try to briefly answer this question before we adjourn for this session. The question came in the Q&A question answer. I'm going to read it. Thank you for your presentation. Could you say some more about what you mean by those neutral spaces for discussions? What might those look like in practice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, neutral spaces. Neutral spaces are very important. I think the consequence of genocide and this conflict on on our side is to destroy all the trust between young people and the elders, but also to lose the trust in the church, academia, all these opinion leaders in the community. So young people are looking for models. And second is about this silence the society by all this trauma and the burden of the identity perception. And then we say, where do we speak from and how do we engage in sensitive topics? So one, when I say natural spaces, yes, it exists in concrete. It is not just an idea. And this has been our experience for the last decade, as I said. Dialogue and consensus, one side, but also defining a very, very structured space. One is about to set a very participatory action research. It means defining some principles and values before people can sit together. We as facilitators, we are ourselves the product of the society. We are traumatized ourselves. So to help facilitators to engage in the natural spaces, putting on the table the rules and procedures from the very introductory point to the conclusion point where you are trying to reconcile opinions. And the reconciling opinions, it includes even agreeing on our disagreement. So it starts from all these values. There is a kind of manual. I have been trying it in a different country, in the Republic of Central Africa, recently about different things, community justice mechanisms, but diversity, neutrality, independence, openness. Those are kind of rules. And the community and the grassroots, it is not complicated for them. It depends on the facilitators, but the setting itself, the space itself, where people are sitting. I could love to share some pictures how these natural spaces are engaged, and then the manual which can lead people. But how do you ensure that all this is recorded and you can use this audiovisual to engage with other spaces? So the neutrality here is an ideal I accept, but it is possible as people are agreeing on principles and values which can guide from the first point to the last point where we are agreeing on the minimum to go for a consensus. Then peace values, community dialogue, it is used in education in school for peace education programs. The same adapted to different spaces. You can see that people really, from the point where they are silenced, traumatized, the way you engage it, people are becoming more open. And you have been having many evidences I can share in the next separate and bilateral point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eric. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists from whom we learned from their wise and insightful presentations, Dr. Euthalie Nyirabega, Dr. Eric Ndushabandi, and Father Marcel Uwineza. We are so very grateful to you for your presence and for your reflections. Thank you so much. We're going to finish this session, and because we are out of time, I apologize. We don't have time for more questions. We're going to take a short break, and we'll start the next session a little bit later than we planned, just to give everybody a chance to get up, stretch if you need to, take a glass of water, etc. So we will start at 10:55 Eastern Daylight Time. So that's about 10 minutes later than we originally planned. Once again, thank you so much, especially to all of you for being here, but especially to our speakers. We're very grateful and indebted to you. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks once again for joining us either this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's wonderful to be part of such a global community, if you will, today. I have the pleasure and honor of introducing our next speaker, Father Dr. Elisee Rutagambwa, for his keynote address, the title of which is The Role of Religion and Religious Communities in Peacebuilding, Rwanda, and the African Context. Dr. Elisee Rutagambwa is a Jesuit priest from Rwanda. After gaining a licentiate in philosophy from the Catholic University of Kinshasa, In the DRC, he pursued and obtained a master's degree and Ph.D. in social ethics, successively from the Weston Jesuit School of Theology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Boston College in Massachusetts, USA. He's currently the Dean of Hekima Institute of Peace Studies and International Relations at Hekima University College, which is a constituent college of the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Prior to coming to Hekima University, he served as the director of the Jesuit Social Research Center, Urumuri, and headed St. Ignatius School Complex in Kigali. At the same time, he was the formation assistant to the regional superior of Rwanda-Burundi region of the Society of Jesus and worked for several years as a consultant to the regional superior. For the last 7 years, Father Elisee has been teaching different courses both at the School of Theology and the Institute of Peace Studies and International Relations. Throughout this time, he's also served on different university committees. In 2018, he served as director of the Center for Research, Training, and Publications, and in 2019, he was a visiting lecturer of social ethics at Santa Clara University in California, USA. Dr. Rutagambwa is also a member of the following professional academic organizations: the Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church, the Global Ethics Network, the Ecumenical Network of South Sudan Africa Hub, the African Council on Religious Leaders for Peace, and African Consortium for Law and Religious Studies. His research interests range from social ethics, Catholic social teaching, political theology, to human rights, genocide studies, peacebuilding, and post-colonial studies. Among his publications are the following: The Role of a Theologian in Genocide Prevention, Theology in Post-Genocide Rwanda, which was published in the journal Horizons in 2020, and the edited book, Reinventing Theology in Post-Genocide Rwanda, Challenges and Hopes, which was published in 2023 by Georgetown University Press. Please join me in welcome Father Dr. Elisee Rutagambwa. Elisee?
Yeah. Should I begin?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Professor Jerry, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be back to Villanova University, even as virtually. Because the last time I was there, I was back around 2008. I was coming to a conference by one of the most outstanding German scholar, Johann Baptist Metz. Unfortunately, he didn't make it because he got sick. But it was a good exposure to the university, and I appreciated it very much. So I'm also thankful to the Department of Arts and Science and for the invitation, but also for really being concerned and offering us this occasion to honor the memory of our loved ones who perished during the genocide. I'm sure the students, the faculty who partake into this will be one day somewhere leaders, and some of those things we are really regretting that happened to Rwanda may not happen again in their sight. So as you said, the topic of my address is the role of religion and religious communities in peace building in Rwanda and in African context. So one of the most daunting challenges that, that societies struggle with in the aftermath of the conflict is the duty to rebuild and reconcile societies or communities. This is even more challenging when it comes to the post-genocide, where the normal becomes abnormal and vice versa. Among prominent factors that determine the process of recovery, religion stands out as a compelling and yet paradoxical phenomenon. As a deep-rooted reality in the fabric of society, religion often works both as a source of comfort and conflict. Beyond the sphere of spirituality, which it deems to be its specific dominion, it extends its influence on other dimensions such as political, social, economic, and cultural. That is why, while it may present potential challenges or even exacerbate the conflict, it is also pregnant with opportunities for remarkable recovery in terms of social healing, reconciliation, and sustainable peace. Therefore, it is crucial to understand its multidimensional role, but most importantly, its capacity to inspire the vision, the values, and the mechanisms to promote peace and restore social cohesion. After presenting a brief overview of the role of religion in societies and its ambivalent role in conflict and peace building, I will focus on the case of Rwanda and highlight how religion's dual function of fueling a conflict and serving as a catalyst for transformative change has played out in the church as well as in religious communities engaged in peace building. On occasion, I will refer to other cases on the continent of Africa, either to substantiate my points or underline similar peacemaking mechanisms and practices. A brief overview of the role of religion in society. From time immemorial, religion has been always an inescapable determinant of individual human and social life. Tracing the role of religion throughout human historical evolution, Indian scholar Dr. Ramamani explains its emergence at the dawn of prehistory and points out how it shifted from being an explanatory of all reality in the universe to being relegated to the private and later resurfaced again in the public sphere as an inescapable phenomenon in human affairs. In ancient times, as she points out, cosmogandry prevailed. The entire cosmos was inhabited by theos and deemed divine. Everything in the universe under one's feet and above one's head was considered sacred. Both Mother Earth and Father Sky were venerated, their cosmic marriage giving birth to the bountiful universe. The incredible fertility of women and nature was worshipped. It was unthinkable for our early ancestors to be anthropocentric and believe that all this marvelous creation was of their own species' benefit alone, to be used and disposed at will. It was self-evident to humans then that the species was but one in this indivisible chain of life where everything was interconnected or infinitely different, yet seamlessly one, end of quote. Chieta expounds on how cultures and civilization were born inspired by their unique geography and endowments of each inhabited piece of the earth. People learn devised rituals, replete with wisdom, redolent with symbolism. As cultures evolved along traditional religion, communities created culturally appropriate ways to manage human affairs. However, as she also notes, human societies were not utopia. Violent conflict rose, but so did ingenious rites to prevent violence, resolve conflict, and reconcile enemies. To this day, she goes on to say, such cosmogandric such cosmogandric belief and peacemaking traditions continue to prevail among ancient spiritual traditions shielded from modernization, though they have been largely abandoned by subsequent mainstream religions. So when people become more and more sedentary and shifted from agrarian to urban living, Dr. Rama says, religions too sought refuge in built-up structures, temples, mosques, churches, and synagogues. These were held sacred area of worship. However, when changing political and religious ideologies emerged, mosques and churches were built on ruined synagogues and temples, and vice versa. The wise knew these sites were potent, regardless which form of God was worshipped thereon. As wars rose to enshrine the deity, differences grew between diverse manifestations, first unwittingly and then deliberately. Demarcation replaced coexistence. Wars not only bounded those within, but also segregated those within from those without. Soon, the material wealth and the temporal power encompassed within became worth defending at any price against outsiders, infidels, heathens, enemies. Competing claims arose to being the chosen people. Thus, the rhetorical rivalry between and within regions sharpened and spilled blood through subsequent centuries. When the Enlightenment, the Reformation, and the scientific rationality challenged and replaced what was deemed blind faith, they emerged theories of secularization. These became more popular in the 60s up to the 80s. With modernization, religions lost their purpose and declined. Europe became the precursor of a global evolutionary trend towards secularization and atheism. Paradoxically, towards the new millennium, the world has desecularized, and religion regained more and more influence to the extent that it can no longer be ignored. Today, although religion may seem irrelevant to some corners of the globe, it is no longer the case. And in some other corners, it is all important. You may refer to the book by Butler, Habermas, Taylor, and West when they talk about the power of religion in the public sphere. Because here they try to reaffirm the role of religion while questioning the absolutization of the public sphere as the year and place of pure rationality. In the same way, religion cannot be always perceived in fundamentalistic terms or in substitution, superstition. Now, the ambivalent role of religion and peace in conflict and peace building. Although all religions pretend to cherish peace and justice, and their sacred scriptures are full of verses to prove the point, the reality proved the contrary. Most religions often instigate conflict and practice injustices. David Smoke acknowledged the fact that in these eloquent terms, no major religion has been exempt from complicity in violent conflict. All major and most minor religions have coveted with violence in dogma and deed, in rhetoric and practice. This is not only recorded in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scriptures, but is also true with the sacrosanct Hindu scriptures. In practice, violence associated with religion takes different shapes. It occurs either between different religions, among factions of the same religion, between believers and atheists or heretics, or even between secular and religious individuals and institutions. So beyond the visible violence, there are also other forms of subtle violence caused by religion. These range from discrimination against targeted groups and communities to gender-based violence, often substantiated by scriptural justification. On the other hand, although this nexus between religion and violence has been in the most recorded, often viewed as a powerful force that shapes individual and collective identities, religion plays a crucial role in facilitating reconciliation and fostering forgiveness in post-conflict societies. In addition, examples of religion leaders and institutions that serve as mediators and peacemakers are uncountable. Their moral authority and influence manage to bridge divided groups and communities and promote dialogues between conflicting parties. But how to account for this role of religion? Picking from the German theologian and philosopher of religion, Rudolf Otto, who examined the idea of the holy and its function in religions of the world, Appleby reports that according to him, the holy is a category of interpretation and evaluation peculiar to the sphere of religion. It is the sine qua non of religion. What remains of religion when it is rational and ethical elements have been excluded. Using the same concept for the sacred, Appleby states, neither good nor evil per se, the sacred manifests itself as the ultimate reality, the source of all being in the universe. Within its realm, power is undifferentiated, neither creative nor destructive in itself, but capable both of generating and extinguishing life. According to Otto, the sacred project of numinous quality, from the numen meaning dynamic, spirited, transhuman energy or force, that inspires mutinous dread and fascination in the subject. An utterly mysterious yet seductive intimate presence, the sacred evokes awe and compels the human spirit, drawing it beyond the ordinary range of imagination and desire. So according to Otto, the numinous quality of the sacred is the deepest and the most fundamental element, strong and sincerely felt religious emotion. He then created the term mysterium tremendum et fascinans to describe it. As he explains, I quote, the encounter with the sacred is always a dialectic experience of mystery, the feeling of dread evoked by its overpowering and uncontrollable presence, tremendum, comes bound up together with feelings of awe, wonder, and fascination. These two qualities, the daunting and the fascinating, now combine in a strange harmony of contrast, he wrote. And the result dual character of the numinous consciousness, to which the entire religious development bears witness, is at once the strangest and most noteworthy phenomenon in the whole history of religion. It is good here to give some examples, the example of Saul, who shifts from a church persecutor to a devoted apostle, or the example of St. Peter, who, after defending Christ and vowing to be ready to die for him, denies him 3 times. It is also the experience of one Rwandan survivor who questioned his identity. This was an interview he had with Dr. Emmanuel Katongole, which was reported in his book, A Journey to Reconciliation. The person told Katongole that he didn't know anymore who he was, and he was afraid to wake up in the morning and find himself as one of these beasts he watched during the genocide. He was no longer trusting himself, the very same way he was no longer trusting anyone else. So it is this dialectic experience of the sacred that explains the ambivalent role of religion, and therefore gives a hint to what happened in Rwanda, as it was not any different. Let's now shift to the Rwandan case and explore why such most Christianized country on the continent shocked the world after 100 years of its evangelization with the most brutal genocide of the century, and yet has recovered significantly and so fast to the extent that it stands as a source of hope for similar tragedies. Now, taking on the case of Rwanda, I would like to look at the role of the religion before the genocide. And when I talk about religion, I'm basically focusing on the church, the Catholic Church, and other Christian denominations. Of course, there is also the role of the Muslims, but they are a very insignificant number. So I would better focus on Christianity. Now, looking at the positive contribution that the missionaries brought to the country, it is noteworthy to underline the introduction of quality education, the Western health care, the agrarian new techniques, the small businesses, the community cooperatives, the Catholic charities, Caritas, that supported the least advantaged and the poor. And all these promoted people's well-being and fostered prosperity. The sacramental and the elevating liturgy that uplifted the souls and served to develop artistic qualities of the faithful. in summary, these are some of the things that I would really underline as positive contribution of the church. But in the same ambivalent role, we see also a negative role, a negative contribution. And this has been highlighted by my previous colleagues, especially Dr. Ndushabandi, who talked about the identity. So here there is the destruction of Rwandan identity. And it is worthy revisiting this, although some of the mechanisms that were used to actually destroy the Rwandan identity was highly and eloquently articulated by Dr. Ndushabandi. But I want here to show the rationality that presided over the destruction of the Rwandan identity and the introduction of ethnic identity. First and foremost, it's good to note that Rwandan conception of the universe was based on a triptych vision of the Rwandan society. And this was permeated in all essential aspects of life, whether religious, political, economic, social, cultural, and you name it. So there was always a trilogy, which meant that this trilogy would always contribute at the same time as reconciling mechanisms. The people of Rwanda believed in their founding myth that they all originated from Gihanga, the founder. But Gihanga had the three sons, the Tutsi, the Twa, and the Hutu. And all this were one family. And of course, those who interpreted this myth put it in their own way and managed to bring in the dualism that was introduced by the colonizers and the missionaries. And we see this also in the leadership. We had a trilogy of leadership that is according to the major activities of Rwandans of the time. So you have Umunyabutaka, the one who was the head of the agricultural land, Umunyengabo, who was the one in charge of defense, and then the head of the pastures, Umunyamukei. And since these activities were complementary, they all worked in harmony. And we see this also in religion. You have at the top, you have God, and then you have Yangombe, who is the mediator, and then you have Rwanda. And each of these trilogy would be something that would always maintain that kind of harmony. And when it comes to social relations, to families, for example, we will always have families, the family, the adversary of the family, and the third part. And in the case of conflict, this third part will come in to reconcile. So all this was disrupted by the introduction by the missionaries, the colonialists, of a Manichaean and polarizing vision of society. And this was orchestrated from different groups as the process of evangelization evolved. So you had first and foremost, when the missionaries came and started converting people, we would have converts or non-converts. And these people would be actually relocating. The converts would spend much of their time at the parish, which was far removed from the habitat of other people. And in terms of activities, it would change. While those who remained behind would be busy with the regular activities of Rwandans to sustain themselves, most of these new converts would spend much of their time reciting rosaries, learning the catechism, or participating in some other church-related activities. So this is split not only the family, but it split people every single aspect of their actions. Now, it also tackled the political and social as the process of ethnicization came in. But before probably I get there, it is good to also show after the conversion, how when the Protestant came in, we see the same duality shifting from believers, from converts and non-converts to Protestants versus Catholics. The Protestants were actually even called the deniers because they were considered to be unbelievers, those who actually shifted away from the faith. And so this was really a very powerful tool of division. And in the process of introduction in the country, you could see that wherever the Protestants came a little late, but when the Catholics were having parishes in any region, the Protestants would come in nearby and set their own churches, which again split the population, because some would go not necessarily because they believed what they were saying, but because there were some incitement that would do, incentives that would associated to what people do. I mean, to which category you approach. If you went to the Protestants, they have all these notebooks with scripture, and on the part of the Catholics, you had rosaries, medallions, and you'd also have clothing and all material things of that sort. And so this is split, the family split communities into these dual mechanisms. Now, this problem would end when Catholicism gained precedence and the Protestantism becomes minority. And this happened when the king converted to Catholicism and invited most of the kingdom to follow him. So that was a battle that was completely removed. Of course, as any social reality, it didn't stop there immediately. There was some fading to that kind of reality. Now, the problem was when we shifted from this duality between Protestant, we started with converts and non-converts, and the non-converts were associated with the Washenzi, people who are retarded or who are backwards. They had all kinds of connotation. And then in between Protestant and Protestant or deniers against Catholics. So this would shift to the ethnic polarization. Now, given that the Twa were a kind of minority, the polarization would more focus on Tutsis versus Hutus. And we see the same process under the Second Republic, when the Tutsi problem was somehow solved because they were discriminated all over and others had fled the country. So it proceeded at the regional level, where you had the South versus the North, the Duga versus the Kiga. Even within the Kiga, under the Second Republic, you would have the Shiru and another group, I don't remember the name. So, which means this was like an evil seed in the society because they kept splitting the society. Now, let us talk about the role of religion during in the post-genocide period. And here I would like to probably escape the context because it has been articulated by my predecessors. Father Marcel did talk about it, and Dr. Ndushabandi talked about it, and Honorable Euthalie did mention some aspect to it. But let me look at what seemed to be the negative role. Here we had the failure to respond to the warning signs announcing the genocide. And this was both in the institutional church, church communities, and it was oral. The association with a genocidal government, this was mostly the institutional church. It is worth noting that the Archbishop of Kigali of the time, who was the president of the National Conference of Bishops, was at the same time a member of the central, how do they call it again? It was the central command of the party, of the ruling party. And he was not ashamed to bring his party signs even at church. And one other bishop who was very, very instrumental actually in denying genocide, in somehow condoning it, was the Bishop of Wengeri, of Byumba, who ended up being killed. He was a cousin of the mastermind of the genocide, and this was the Bagosora. So there was also actual participation in genocidal killings by priests and nuns. And some of the nuns have been tried in Belgium. The priests, some priests, including the one who was convicted to the crime of genocide, who actually brought a bulldozer at the parish of Nyange to wrap up what he called the dirtiness after they had killed his parishioners, who amounted to 5,000 people. There was also the failure to protect innocent people when they were being exterminated and the church properties were spoiled. And the church leadership did not speak out. They didn't protect refugees in most cases. Actually, they told them that even God had abandoned them. It was the failure to name the evil, what was being perpetrated, the genocide, and unequivocally condemn the genocide perpetrators. And they would hide behind this nice language of reconciliation, of bringing people together. But this was just insane when one knows that those who are actually in the boats of the ruling party and all the machinery of the government were actually perpetrators who did it in the open day and who did not have any shame to do it, who actually were inviting people to do so. So it was clear that if you do not condemn and actually put a finger on those who were really carrying out the genocide, then you were just in denial. So after the genocide, there was also the denial of genocide. And sometimes the failure actually to use the term genocide, using just issues of ethnocentrism, or talking about this anger that prompted people to kill their neighbors and so forth. So it took almost until 2000, around the time that we're shifting transition, that they started actually acknowledging that genocide took place. There was also the failure to apologize once it was clear that the church and religious communities partook into the killings. Now, what was positive that the churches did in the post-genocide period? First of all, there have been some instances of charity, trying to help out those who were destitute after the genocide, sometimes hosting them in some pastoral centers. Of course, it was another trial because in the very same pastoral centers that people had been killed during the genocide. And I remember visiting some of them in 1994 and finding the stains of blood in the walls. So these are the places where some of the survivors were forced to take refuge after the genocide. Now, but what is most notable, and here I wanted to underline some of the challenges of the time, even though they have been mentioned, so that people understand why these initiatives made sense, even though it was not as satisfying as it was executed. So most of the challenges we had this time was the massive destruction of human lives and goods, the victims' unspeakable suffering. Marcel and Honorable Euthalie talked about the women victims of rape, and some of whom were contaminated with AIDS and had babies also contaminated. So there was a real sense of apocalyptic suffering. Now, there were poor conditions and outcry of justice, the overwhelming task of ensuring security. And here it is good to notice that in Rwanda, unlike any other country on the continent, the so-called ethnic groups live together, even in families, because this was kind of social engineering by colonialism. The real reality of that identified Rwanda were the clans. And you find in the very same times within the Tutsis and the Twa. Now, there was also the overwhelming task of ensuring security, because people were living side by side, and some were still dressing with the clothes they actually took off from their victims. And the survivors were there to see it and probably identify who must have killed their families. Now, there was also the defying task of rebuilding from scratch a collapsed economy and social infrastructure. The impossibility of trying the culprit were so numerous in a collapsed justice system. This again has been underlined. So one of the peace-building initiative that the church took was to run what has been called the Christian Recherche. Here it has been also articulated. I want to just talk about the different forms it took. So before the implementation there was an initial phase of research and trying to experiment and see if these mechanisms of Recherche would work. So when it came to the implementation phase, the government opted for focusing on the judicial perspective of Recherche, the public justice, while the Catholic Church approached it chiefly as a mechanism of reconciliation and healing. So the Catholic Church's approach led to what has been called the Christian Recherche, or as Bishop Uwineza called it, a justice that reconciles. As he suggested in his summary report as a member of the commission, it was the task of the tribunals and not of Recherche, of Christian Recherche, to judge the murderers, rapes, and thefts committed during the genocide, whereas Recherche, Christian Recherche, would help in establishing the truth and promoting the true values on which the society would reconstruct itself. So Christian Recherche was then pioneered by the Catholic Church and initiated by part of the clergy and the faithful who recognized their collective responsibility in the tragedy and decided to reconstruct the church anew. It meant to create a platform for conversion between survivors and perpetrators or their families within the church. Now, what was the context and the opportune moment for initiating Christian Recherche? This was a defining moment, as the church had been blamed for her reluctance to speak out while innocent Tutsis were slaughtered in churches and the Catholic school buildings, and some of her clerics were involved in the killings. Besides, another part of the church, including the Hutu priests in former Zaire, now DRC, refugee camps, as well as some of the missionaries who continue to deny or minimize the genocide against the Tutsi. It was a time to reconsider her attitude. Now, here you have a divided church. You have a church that has fled with the perpetrator, who are still upholding the very ideology that led to genocide, and who totally deny whatever has happened took place. And on the other side, you have some of the surviving priests and bishops who managed to recreate condition for the church. Here there was also an initiative by a priest who not only tried to bring people together, but managed to actually question, the very existence of the church and what it has involved in. This was in the view of recreating a condition for people to go back to church, and not just to carry on business as usual. So another factor that contributed to the Christian Recherche was the 2000-year Jubilee, a special year of forgiveness and reconciliation that had been proclaimed by John Paul II for the Catholic Church. And this was announced in one of the documents that was published in 1994. This coincided with the centenary anniversary of the arrival of the first missionaries in Rwanda. So rather than celebrating the success, the church used the occasion of to conduct a self-examination about her role during the genocide and revisit her duty to reconcile a divided church. So that is how the church decided to organize a synod on ethnocentrism. That's how they called it. Again, here you could see it was not clarified that the issue was a genocide that was targeting a specific group. So it was like both ethnic groups were equally victims and perpetrators. So, so on the other hand, since the church had been severely criticized for her role during the genocide and had a strenuously relationship with the new government and genocide survivors, the celebration of the Jubilee at the end of the synod served as an opportunity for public apology and renewal of her relationship with the new government. Now, what were the objectives and the process of this Christian church? As was mentioned by Bishop Uwineza, there were two major objectives: trauma healing, which they called in Rwanda Usana Imitima, or restoring the hearts, or restoring humanity, and forgiveness and reconciliation. This was meant to reconcile, in the first place, the Christians themselves. They have been turning each other apart. And then thereafter, confronting the ethnocentrism that was identified as the major cause of the genocide. Now, in terms of the process, they formed the church commissions for the synod. They organized training sessions for facilitators, setting up structures from the diocese to the parish levels. So synod facilitators comprised priests, basic community leaders, and some specifically people who were named according to their influence in their parishes or churches. Now, opening the synod by a mass celebration presided by bishops with all the priests in the diocese, and followed by explanation of the objectives in the process of to the participants. The conducting the church sessions following the methodology and the protocols of shared stories, which involved creating what Dr. Ndushabandi called neutral spaces. Here they called these safe spaces, which meant first and foremost to be confidential, where people were ready to tell the truth and were also disposed to observe mutual respect. So they were also instructed to listen while others are talking and avoid to making comments. And then later on, when they have gone through all the process, decide whether or not they are ready to forgive and reconcile. So there was also instances of testimonies of the experience. Those who partook into some of the training had to go to court, to testify as a way of inviting more people to partake into the process. So the process ended with the Synodal Assembly bringing together clergy and laity. This was in 2000. Now, what was the outcome? In terms of achievement, there was indeed some sense of rehabilitation of the genocide survivors. There was a church diffused the tensions in favored mutual healing between perpetrators and survivors of genocide who belong to the very same church communities. There were genuine confession and forgiveness, of course, at a very small scale. And of course, it is very, very difficult actually to find a clear and objective methodology to evaluate this. But telling from some of the experiences of people who genuinely confessed and apologized and later engaged in activities that proved that they were genuine. So there was a sense that there was some kind of achievement at that level. Now, people also started participating in common worship and pastoral work. And given that the government has been encouraging also doing some communal work together and engaging in the common businesses as a way of putting people together and engaging them for common purposes, these Christians who partook into this were also able to actually benefit from these assets. Now, what are the weaknesses of this Christian church? First and foremost, there was the lack of common policy of the Rwandan church as a whole, because each diocese took up the initiative and conducted it independently. So different pace by different dioceses were observed. They did not begin at the same time. So we see, for example, the Diocese of Euthalie started on September 5th, 1998. Kibungo started December 6th the same year. Nyundo and Ruhengeri were delayed, and due to the insecurity caused by infiltrators. These were people, the very same perpetrators were infiltrating from DRC and killing people in Rwanda. And the Diocese of Gikongoro began on April 9th, a year later. This was again due to the trial and imprisonment of the bishop of the place, Bishop Augustine Misago, who was at the time in jail for genocide-related accusations. So in the process, there were instances of re-traumatization as people were telling the stories and sometimes facing those who actually killed their loved ones. There were instances of re-traumatization, and some of which were very difficult to handle, because people were not very well disposed and not prepared. There were also different approaches. So only 3 dioceses, Kigali, Kyangwe, and Nyundo, seriously tackled the issue of ethnicity and made use of Gacaca methodology consistently. For Kabwe and Butare, the theme of ethnocentrism was tackled along other themes such as family education or family or education. So in Kibungo, they took a spiritual approach. So none of these, skills of mediation and storytelling were employed. They just recourse to the regular church practices like going to confession and participating into liturgy and sacraments. So there was no clear criteria for evaluation of the outcome apart from what people were willing to communicate in their testimony. Only Kigali Diocese commissioned a survey in 2001, which revealed the significant existence of ethnic divisions within the Christian community and among neighbors. It also acknowledged the sentiment of anger, hatred, rancor, jealousy, mistrust, and fear that prevailed during the war and genocide and led the Christian community to abandon their neighbors to the killers. Finally, it also revealed the Christians' failure to live up to their faith. This was clearly articulated at the Archdiocese of Kigali in 2001. There was also a lack of common strategy for continuity. As you understand, this was a process that was set for the 4th period during that very year of Jubilee, but there was no strategy of continuity, and it was much more needed. And I think to this day, that is something that is still needed if we are to face up with some of the ongoing ideologies of genocide and the kind of nostalgia some of the perpetrators and their families have to live a situation like what they lived before. Now, apart from this institutional church process, there were also individual and Christian community initiatives. And here I would just note 3 of them. We had Father Bard Rugwisangoga, the late, who died of COVID 2 years ago. And there was also a lady named Anne-Marie Mukanguranga, who started the process of peace building with her husband as a couple. And then they ended up creating a group called the Merciful Good Samaritan. And the third is Emmanuel Community. This was a charismatic community that existed, which initially were dealing with the apostolate towards the couples, especially those who have challenges and they were also in the business of preparing couples for marriage. But then when this problem came up, they took it up and tried to work for reconciliation among people. Now, Father Ibard started the process as a healing ministry. So he would gather people in churches, and while at Mass, he would pray for them, and sometimes cast out the demons. And so the thing evolved, and he started really bringing in so many people, and some of whom claimed they were healed. And he started also confronting people on an individual basis so that they don't hide behind the crowd, to really say what is happening in their own lives, whether they really are ready either to confess evil or wrongdoing, or if they are ready to forgive. And so there were instances of people who actually came up and who, through the process, confessed to perpetrating genocide, and others who forgave their perpetrators. Now, Anne-Marie and her husband, they began around 1985. At the time, there was an incident in which they were attacked by a mob of Hutus, and the husband was terribly wounded and was in coma for a month, and Anne-Marie managed to escape quite by chance. So when life came to normal, they decided to thank God by engaging in some activities that would be helpful to people. So they started feeding the street kids, sometimes also visiting the poor. And when the genocide took place, they again survived quite by chance. And when they survived, Anne-Marie felt she had a calling, and the calling was to be able to advocate for peace and manage to, to bring people together again. So in the process, she had many followers, and they ended up building up this group that is called the Merciful Samaritan. And they were coming actually to pray at our church, our Jesuit church chapel at Santa Cristus in Uwineza in Kigali. And they built up a choir. They started devoting to adoration, and whoever partook into their sessions would also spend quite 2 hours time in adoration, after which then they would start sharing stories, and those who were ready to actually move on were able to testify. So at some point, when this was affirmed, she felt another call. And this was really something very significant, because there was a very huge number of perpetrators. And at the time, the judicial system was still very weak. It was almost inexistent. And so nothing was done actually to address the perpetrators. So she started visiting prisons and calling upon the perpetrator in prison to actually think about their souls and start confessing their wrongdoing. And some of whom also ended up belonging to this group. So it was initially an individual initiative, but ended up becoming a community which brought together some nuns, some lay people. It was a kind of broader kind of community. Now, the Emmanuel community, as I said, it was mainly in the apostolate, it was the couple. But when the challenges to reconciliation came up, they took it up and they started bringing people together. And their approach was purely charismatic and spiritual. So no issue of invoking who is the victim, who is non-victims. They would just go together and pray their way, their charismatic way, and wait just for God to, to operate within the hearts. So when you look at these initiatives, you find that they played a prophetic role in the first place, because this was not a good time where you could go engage with perpetrators, because the situation was still very, very difficult. But it was also a community-based initiative where even those who started as individuals managed to mobilize people around them and lead a much more powerful movement. And we're very sensitive to the margins, which is very, very important, especially at the church level. And they were also able to challenge those churches who had remained behind, who camped in their positions. And all in all, even though they were still very sizable compared to the needs, the church in Rwanda is a very big church. And most of these initiatives took place in the capital city, except for one of Uwineza, which went to the provinces as well. So it didn't really have as much impact as we would have expected. But still, we see, for example, the values that they channel, the values of togetherness, the values of truth and justice, the values of compassion, the values of humanity, and not clinging on one's group, but really going beyond the group and trying to become this renewed humanity that St. Paul talked about. Now, they could have done more and they could have continued. But of course, there were some challenges, some of which have been mentioned by my previous presenters. Now, in terms of conclusion, I would say it springs from the above initiative and subsequent reflection that the response to the complexity of post-genocide or any other situation of mass violence require to conduct trauma healing at the same time as reconciliation. You know, there was some kind of reluctance to even talk about reconciliation while people were still under trauma. But if you do not read those two together, then you miss a point because these have been reinforcing each other. Nonetheless, it is also important to remember that each case has its distinctive context and presents its own particularities. And this, again, is what Dr. Ndushabandi has mentioned. When it comes to the situation of Rwanda, people tend to forget that the genocide occurred while Rwanda was in the process of democratization. But the way this democratization was received, it was not on project of society driven by political parties. It was based on ethnicity. And given the ideology and the propaganda, which had singled out a group as a group to disappear. So you understand that in the aftermath of the genocide, to carry on the same kind of process of democratization was disastrous. It was suicide. And that's how it was very important that people come together, devise another way, another procedure to democratize, not just to copy, you know, the rubrics of the Western pattern of democratization, but really rethink what has happened to us and then advise or devise mechanism that would fit and that would keep people together. And that's why Rwanda has chosen to, you know, unity and renewal as the pillars of rebuilding the new nation. So it is wise to assume that there is, it is not wise to assume there is a universal recipe valid everywhere and at any time, be it as a sound and reasonable course of action. While we highly recommend this complementary dialectic approach, which brings together trauma healing and reconciliation, it is also imperative to appreciate the holistic character that it has too. because not only it was about dialogue, it was about mediation, but it was also about education. People needed to understand from psychological and social perspectives what happened to them, and not just copy skills and try to implement without understanding what happened to them. So in conclusion, as I repeat this, while we highly recommend a complementary and dialectic approach and appreciate its holistic character, which is instrumental in human societies under similar circumstances at Rwanda, it is crucial to pay attention to each case in its distinctiveness and always keep an open window for flexibility and creativity. This is only to say that once you have people facing any challenge, they always have an understanding what they can do to face it or to respond to it. So to come and impose ways doesn't help. It actually carry on the very things that people wanted to avoid. So I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm ready to expand if you have some questions or clarifications or comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Elisee. We are grateful for your remarks today. We have time for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, again, feel free to either type it into the question and answer box or to raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you and allow you to articulate your question verbally. I have a question that I would love to ask if no one else is ready. I've been ready. I've been listening closely to you, Elisee, and wondering about something which is really, for me, a challenge to my belief in the Catholic Church as a Catholic and as a Catholic theologian. When I hear from you about bishops denying genocide took place, and also essentially being complicit in the genocide, I ask myself, how does this happen in the church, which is supposed to be the servant of Christ? How do you think this came to be? In other words, was this a function of these bishops being elected, the wrong type of bishops being chosen? Or did they change once they became bishops? Did they become hungry for power once they became bishops in Rwanda? And by the way, of course, we know that this kind of hunger for power exists in bishops elsewhere. It exists across the world in the church, and this is what is so challenging for me as a Catholic to see. And also, when this was going on, how did the Vatican respond? They had to know, of course, the Pope had to know, and his advisors had to know that bishops were either denying or complicit in the genocide. So I'm sorry for the multi-level question, but please, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we are all, the fruits of our societies. And genocide doesn't just occur like that. There's an entire process of demonization of a certain group, which becomes somehow a common acknowledged fact. Even when people act reasonably, they can see it is wrong. There are laws that are set in place. There are long drawn-out processes of discriminating people or demonizing or dehumanizing them in such a way that when they get killed, you just find it's like killing, the cockroaches or these animals associated with them. As a matter of fact, one of the bishops actually was justifying, saying, when in a situation like this, you have to do what you have to do. You have to defend yourself. But he couldn't articulate what it meant to defend oneself. If it meant to kill babies, to kill people who had nothing to do with what was going on, and so forth. So looking at the situation in Rwanda, I would say that it was the product of this long drawn out process of dehumanization of the Tutsis, which heightened during the genocide because of the use of the machinery of the state, the media, and also the international media, which not only looked away, but sometimes distorted the narrative. And so even what was getting to the Vatican, it was always imbued with this ideology. Pope St. John Paul II was the first one actually to name it genocide. But in his appeals, he was always thinking in terms of that kind of neutrality, or trying to reconcile the warring parties and so forth. But there was no clear message that there is a part that is really killing innocent people. And this is really something that was clear, at least in some regions. Like the southern region, there was no war whatsoever. And it was the most destroyed. So at least in some pockets where it was very clear, I think naming the evil and naming its perpetrators was really crucial. But there was something that also probably didn't want to disown his own bishops. And he felt probably he needed to go by what they told him. But there wasn't really a forceful and firm, condemnation of what was going on. But of course, later on, I've had, in this kind of debate as we're commemorating, they challenged the church. And Pope Francis came up with an apology, which not only focused on individual church members, but also, mentioned the institution as such. So if you read my article in the edited book, Reinventing Theology, I do revisit some of those apologies and show how Pope Francis actually has created a window for those who really want to go further and do the right thing. I don't know if that answers the whole question, but that's what I can say. Oh, one thing I also mentioned was the relationship between the bishops and some of the top perpetrators. Some will, have family relationships. So it made it much easier for them to, to associate with them.
Thank you very much, Elisee. We have a question in the question and answer. I'll read it out loud, but you can also see it, obviously. Thank you, Professor Rutagambwa. What successes do you think the churches in Rwanda have had in rebuilding community trust over the last 30 years, and where do they still have work to do?
Yeah, first and foremost, given the harm and the way the church behaved from the very beginning, I would say whatever has taken place remains, unsatisfactory. But they had, as I mentioned, in the achievement of Christian Recherche, there have been a creation of a sense of belonging to the Catholic Church. Because after the genocide, the people were no longer going to church, because the church represented the slaughterhouse where their family members were killed. And in terms of church activities, now everyone is participating, the numbers has increased again. But in terms of questioning the teachings that the church carried on prior and during the genocide, rethinking education of priests and education of faithful, some of those remain to be done because there is really a need for interruption. I did mention, for example, how some of these practices, whether sacramental practices or liturgy, they were the focus of the church. And it was also they were also the criteria to judge the success of the church. In disregard that while these people were practicing these sacramentalities and this liturgy, they actually disregarded some of the injustices and the discrimination that were taking place And this was captured in the perpetration of genocide, because we see perpetrators who actually use the very same liturgy while they are perpetrating genocide. The chants, the wearing of medallion and rosaries, while they were holding machetes, going to hunt down their killers and so forth. So this is what they ripped from the kind of teaching they received and the kind of practice they received. But as to issues we are talking about of peace dialogue, of issues of social justice and so forth, these were never mentioned because the church was involved actually in perpetrating the same crimes. So it is crucial that while we are thinking of successes, we really address some of these root causes and do a reinventing actually, not only of theology, but also of the church. Because what we experienced was not a church. Church is about Eucharist, church is about communion. But the genocide was the denial of communion. It was the denial of the human dignity of persons who were created in the image and likeness of God, which is the denial of our faith. It is a denial of God himself, because he's the author of this kind of dignity. So there is a lot to be done still. Thank you.
We have some more very interesting questions in the Q&A. I'll read the first one to you, and you can view it yourself as well. Thanks, Dr. Elisee Rutagambwa. Thanks for your presentation. Could I be correct to say, given the involvement of the church in such actions, that they are contrary to Christian values? Should the way in which evangelization was done and converts recruited to be blamed?
Yeah, let me see it again. Well, we cannot blame it all on evangelization, because I think there's still a human responsibility. Because when the local church took over, by the time actually of the genocide, all the bishops were Rwandans. So we cannot always blame others. Certainly there was a big role played by the process of evangelization. And they still bear also their responsibility. But 60 years after independence and after the church has been somehow in the hands of Rwandans, I think there should have been a different path to take. So, and I think also the issue as we stand now is not to play the blame game, because that leads nowhere. It's really important now to engage in this action of reconstruction and try to focus on the future. Because if you go backwards, we only get numbed and desperate. The evil that was perpetrated is beyond our imagination. It is just unthinkable. So focusing on what is positive that can be done, I think is very important. And it is also time for Rwandans to take responsibility, which involves actually to challenge some of the foreigners who still wanted to push us in those kind of categories and the practices that have led to destruction. Thank you.
And we have one more question. There are instances of clergy of the Catholic Church providing refuge and assistance to Tutsi who are being targeted to be killed, and other instances where members of clergy were implicated, as you spoke about, in the 1994 genocide against Tutsis. Is this paradox related to nature or nurture?
Both. Part of it is human nature. As I said when I was trying to explain this ambivalence of the sacred. So you can easily shift from a perpetrator to a repentant, peacemaker, or you can do the reversed process, as you have seen. I've seen St. Paul, I've seen St. Peter, who are actually the head of the church. Right? So part of it is that, but the other part is nurtured as well. Because as I said, the whole process of evangelization and of sowing the seed of division on purpose and involving education, involving politics, involving administration reforms involving preaching, all these devices that really have contributed to this. You cannot that this all is natural. I think they depended on human decision making. So that's why actually in the article I mentioned, I tried to challenge leadership and trying to see how leadership can not just be about power, but really about service and conversion, because you cannot give what you don't have. So it is very crucial that leaders really convert and be the kind of people can trust, because that is actually what the vocation of church leadership is all about. It's first and foremost to encounter Jesus and espouse his ways and really have him in you so that he can even challenge your weaknesses. But that process requires a commitment, it requires dedication, it requires to give away the ways of the world and really be a new person, as St. Paul says. And without that recreation, what Jesus was telling to Nicodemus, that you have to be born anew. If this doesn't take place and you just get water on your front head, it doesn't change anything. I'm sure probably the other panelists, if they're still there, they have their own experiences, they can also respond.
Yes, if Honorable Euthalie or Dr. Eric would like to speak to these questions, so feel free, we have a few minutes.
Allow me to share one experience about this very brilliant presentation and the reflections. Thank you for that, Elisee. I was about to ask around these success stories, as Mr. Gerard highlighted well. And my comment would be one, the positionality of the church on the ongoing injustice and killings and hate speeches in the region. So I was about to share experience. I'm working with the Catholic Church in the region, Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, and especially for Rwanda, to try to see how these experiences can be documented, and those success stories to be put in a very friendly manual to see if this can be at the grassroots in the communities and used, and by the way later to be used to other countries, because those initiatives have to be documented. And here the idea is, how do we hand it and make it very friendly, be used to generalize and to apply to communities, Communauté Ecclésiale de Base or somewhere else, and especially how do we integrate the ecumenism, working with other churches or faith-based organizations. So I'm asking here and reflecting on how this reflection can bring us to this very concrete and way forward on a manual use, and this experience can be used for communities, and people can know every priest what is required to know that every pastor in the Catholic Church can use it and go for it behind the Holy Spirit who is infusing this talent and the charisma. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that is the challenge we have right now. And in my view, it should also be both ways, bottom up and then up downwards. Because if at the high church leadership level, there is no goodwill, or if there is lethargy where I feel like people do not know what to do and so forth, then even though it starts from it wouldn't have the same impact. But at the same time, I see there are so many activities taking place in the country, and I'm sure most of the Christians partake into that. So if they bring that to the smaller Christian communities and try to play their role, because our church is still very, it's very clergy-centered. and the Christians don't feel like they have responsibility, but we are the family, the church family. And I think in a good family, each member has to play their own role. That's how people can grow. That's how people can, commit to, to bringing transformative kind of change that we need in the church. And I really appreciate what Dr. Ndushabandi is doing, because it is very important to have someone who is skilled and who is knowledgeable, to talk from an objective perspective, because that's where you happen even to break some of this polarization of narratives. When people are able to see that you can really speak the truth and you have concerns, I think that sends the message that you are credible, and then they can join in. But otherwise, you can just stay in the same positioning, and nothing will happen if people do not take action.
Well, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm very grateful for your valuable time, Father Dr. Elisee and Dr. Eric Ndushabandi, Honorable Euthalie Nyirabega. We again are so grateful for everything that you have enlightened us with today. We've learned about the incredible progress that has been made in Rwanda since the genocide. We've also learned about the work that remains to be done, the obstacles to sustainable peace. And for that, we're very grateful. And please know that Rwanda remains in our hearts and our prayers during this difficult time of remembrance of the genocide that took place against the Tutsis in 1994. And we look forward to continuing to learn from you in the future. Tomorrow, as you know, if you're still with us, we'll be turning our attention from Rwanda to the war and genocide in Bosnia. I hope to see at least some of you there. And again, thanks to everyone for your attention today and for being together with us as we remember Rwanda.